Welcome back to another explainer, where we take some of the most complex, cutting-edge frameworks out there and break them down into clear, actionable insights for you. Today, we've got something really fascinating lined up. We're going to completely demystify a truly groundbreaking clinical framework, one that's specifically designed for high-performing professionals dealing with chronic stress and system overload. Look, if you've ever felt like your body is just hoarding tension that you can't seem to shake, no matter how hard you try to just think your way out of it, you are in exactly the right place. Okay, let's dive into this. The framework we're exploring today is known as the C.O.R.E. method. That stands for Clearing Overwhelming Retained Experiences. Now, I want you to really notice that word retained. We aren't just talking about your standard run-of-the-mill stress that comes and goes. No, we're talking about experiences and tension that your physical body has actually trapped. We are addressing systemic nervous system overload. Basically what happens when your biological container is just literally full. To get a full grasp of this, here is our cognitive roadmap for today. We'll start by mapping your allostatic load. Then we'll reframe symptoms using the heavy backpack metaphor. After that, we'll dive into the clinical engine, the hub and spoke matrix, walk through the 3 phases of healing, and check out how to maintain that balance with gyroscopic stabilization. Finally, we'll wrap up with practitioner and global delivery. All right, Section 1, Mapping Your Allostatic Load. Now what's really interesting about this slide is how precisely these danger zones are defined. To understand exactly what's happening under the hood of your nervous system, we first need to map what clinicians call your allostatic load. Take a look at level 1. That is your optimal window, just a healthy amount of functional tension. But as that load index creeps up into level 2, we start seeing the slow leak. This is where you get that subtle irritability or chronic fatigue. But it's when we hit level 3, the storm state, that things get very serious. Here, the load index is sitting between 51 and 85%, bringing on severe sympathetic hyperarousal. We're talking severe performance anxiety, sudden stuttering, emotional shutdown, even compulsive addictions. This level 3 acute overload, this is the exact primary target for the C.O.R.E. intervention. Because if a system pushes past this into level 4, absolute chaos, you're looking at a full biological collapse, which moves completely outside the C.O.R.E. boundaries and straight into a medical crisis zone. Moving right along, Section 2, the heavy backpack metaphor. To really understand how we actually treat a level 3 overload, I want you to consider a specific and kind of challenging question. If 2 people walk into a clinic with entirely different issues, let's say one person has a severe paralyzing stutter and the other is fighting a really tough compulsive addiction, how can the exact same clinical method effectively treat both of them? For the analytical minds out there, that almost doesn't make sense at first glance, right? Well, the conventional view would tell us these are entirely separate diseases that need totally distinct diagnoses. You send the stutter to a speech therapist, and the addiction goes to a specialized counselor. But the C.O.R.E. method flips that on its head. It views these issues as different signatures written by the exact same condition, a system carrying way too much weight. Imagine a client wearing a heavy backpack stuffed with 80 pounds of solid stone. If carrying that intense weight causes one person's knees to absolutely buckle, but it causes another person's back to go into spasms, you don't send them to a knee specialist and a back specialist, you simply take the heavy stones out of the backpack, unless, they just really enjoy carrying rocks around. The stutter, the fear of public speaking, the addiction, they aren't the root problems. They're simply different forms of evidence that the body is carrying too much weight. The C.O.R.E. method doesn't treat a symptom list, it discharges the load. Okay, Section 3, the hub and spoke matrix. Let's be real for a second. Most modern programs market these rigid, linear, 10-step protocols. But honestly, those conveyor belt methods usually fail because they completely ignore the reality of a living, breathing, totally unpredictable human nervous system. The C.O.R.E. method rejects that linear sequence altogether. Instead, it operates on something called the hub and spoke matrix. This is a highly adaptive, real-time intervention system designed to meet the client exactly where their nervous system is in that very second. So here's how this actually plays out in a session. Step 1 is the central hub, which is clinical hypnotherapy. It acts almost like a powerful magnetic force field to uproot deep-seated blockages and install fresh neurological program. But what happens if the body panics and just throws up a massive wall? That brings us to Step 2, satellite spokes. These are modalities like cognitive behavioral therapy, EMDR, EFT, NLP. They're rapidly pulsed in to shatter that stubborn physiological wall. Crucially, these aren't separate scheduled steps on a checklist. They're applied dynamically, right in the moment. Then we hit Step 3, reabsorption. Once that physical trace is dissolved and the charge is shattered, The practice returns the client immediately back to the main hypnotherapy hub to continue that deep core work. Next up, Section 4, 3 Phases of Healing. This healing journey happens in 3 very distinct phases. Phase 1 is the congested container. Imagine the claustrophobic, incredibly tense energy of a high-stakes environment, where your throat clenches up or terrible insomnia takes over. The system is just pushed completely beyond its threshold. Then, we move into Phase 2, the hub-and-spoke execution. This is the deep clinical setting where that acute release actually happens. We're pulling out the heavy blocks and installing clear, functional light paths. Finally, we reach Phase 3, customized liberation and assimilation. The tension? It's gone. The visual field feels wide, smooth, and incredibly grounded. This is where the client steps back into the real world with entirely new autonomy. And this brilliantly illustrates how real-world stability is actually secured by the client outside the clinical hour, and how it's highly customized. On one side, you've got highly primed clients. They might be sitting right on the absolute edge of a breakthrough. They can achieve instant, independent autonomy after just a single session needing 0 post-session guidance. But on the flip side, you've clients with complex developmental layers. For them, their nervous systems require structured executive coaching, active cognitive tracking, and disciplined self-hypnosis just to build up their baseline over time. This matters because real-world stability isn't some one-size-fits-all magic trick. It adapts to exactly what your unique system requires to thrive. Section 5, the gyroscopic stabilization. To maintain that hard-won balance, the method integrates principles from a 1,000-year-old lineage of Middle Eastern and North African contemplative wisdom, specifically concepts like muraqabah. This translates roughly to deep inner observation and radical surrender. Now, I want to clarify immediately, this is absolutely not dogmatic. It has nothing to do with installing new spiritual or religious beliefs. The clinical hypnotherapy has already installed the new psychological programming. Rather, this wisdom is used purely as a gravity-tested stabilization architecture that applies to anyone, no matter their background. So the crucial point is this. Think of these ancient technologies of meaning-making as a literal suspension system for the human mind. Just like the high-end shocks on a performance vehicle, this gyroscopic stabilization absorbs the intense friction of high-stakes environments. It ensures that your newly regulated nervous system doesn't just lose its balance the second it gets hit by the inevitable chaos of daily professional life. It simply smooths out the ride of existence. Finally, Section 6, Practitioner and Global Delivery. Surprisingly enough, this framework didn't just emerge from standard life coaching or typical corporate wellness programs. It was actually forged in a clinical speech-language pathology clinic at NEP Rabat by Coach Youssef. By deeply studying how caregivers shape a child's developing voice, he realized a profound truth. A physical inability to speak, like severe stuttering, is rarely a mechanical problem. It's actually an autonomic threat response. It is the body itself deciding it is simply not safe to be heard. His deep clinical work with neurodivergent populations really cemented his core philosophy. The body itself is the primary site of healing, and conventional, normative fixes just flat-out fail when dealing with a saturated nervous system. To execute all of this, Coach Youssef bridges clinical hypnotherapy and executive wellness with a seriously rigorous set of tools. He brings the authority of an NGH and NBCCH certified clinical hypnotherapist, alongside being a kinetic shift practitioner trained directly by the UK Hypnosis Academy. You add to that his specialized practice in EFT, NLP, and CBT, and you've got a highly adaptable clinical toolkit. Operating under City Counseling Center LLC out of Wyoming, he delivers this framework globally via telehealth, or locally in person in Rabat, Morocco. But perhaps the most powerful advantage here? The trilingual execution. Being fluent in native Arabic, French, and English is absolutely vital. It allows him to meet a client's nervous system in its absolute native language, completely removing any linguistic friction from the healing process. And that brings us to the ultimate destination of the C.O.R.E method, perfectly captured in this final concept: autonomic discharge, somatic restoration, cleared ground. It's really all about moving from a congested, totally overwhelmed biological container to a state of complete, independent autonomy. By taking those heavy stones out of the backpack, updating the subconscious programming, and installing a gyroscopic suspension system, the nervous system is finally set free. So I'll leave you with this final thought. What heavy, unseen stones are you currently carrying around in your backpack? And what could your life and your career look like if you finally learned how to set them down? Think about that for a while. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.